I'm Hannah, 32 years old, and I've lived my entire life hearing those cutting words from my mother. You'll never match your sister. They echo in my mind whenever I try something new. Growing up in Diana's shadow wasn't just difficult, it shaped my entire identity. Today, though, something changed. When Mom sneered those familiar words at me, I finally found the courage to stand my ground. Let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to fight for your own identity in your family. Growing up in our middle-class home in Boston, I always felt like I was competing in a race I never signed up for. My sister Diana was 4 years older, and in my mother, Margaret's eyes, she could do no wrong. Diana was the perfect daughter, beautiful with her long blonde hair and bright blue eyes that matched my mother's, brilliant in school with straight A's, and talented in every sport she tried. I wasn't Diana. My hair was a mousy brown that never seemed to fall right. My grades were good, but not spectacular. And I was clumsy at sports. But I was just a kid trying to find my way, not realizing I was being measured against an impossible standard. The piano recital when I was 9 stands out in my memory. I had practiced for weeks, my small fingers, diligently learning Mozart's Twinkle Twinkle Little Star variations. When the night came, I played without a single mistake. My heart swelled with pride as the audience applauded. I looked to my mother, hoping to see that same pride reflected in her eyes. "That was nice, Hannah," she said with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But remember when Diana played Chopin's Nocturne at her first recital? Everyone was so impressed." My moment of triumph crumbled. Diana had been 12 at her first recital, but that context didn't matter to my mother. Middle school graduation brought similar pain. I had won the art award, the only student in my grade to receive this recognition. As we drove home, my father congratulated me from the driver's seat. "It's just art," my mother interjected from beside him. "Diana was valedictorian of her class. That takes real intelligence." I stared out the window, watching raindrops race down the glass, each one like a tear I refused to shed. When I was 14, I wrote a poem about autumn leaves that my English teacher submitted to a youth literary magazine. It was published, and I couldn't wait to show my mother. I found her in the kitchen making dinner. "Mom, look, my poem got published." I held out the magazine, my hand trembling slightly. She glanced at it briefly. "That's nice, honey. Did you finish your math homework? You know you need to keep your grades up if you want to get into a good college like Diana." The magazine fell to my side. My excitement extinguished. Art became my sanctuary. While Diana excelled at everything academic and athletic, I found peace in colors and shapes. Hours spent drawing and painting in my room were hours free from comparison. Diana didn't care about art. It was the one area where my mother couldn't compare us directly. Diana wasn't cruel about any of this. In fact, she was kind to me, sharing her clothes and helping with homework. She simply didn't notice the dynamic. How could she? She was the golden child, never feeling the sting of being measured and found wanting. I developed a mantra that I whispered to myself on particularly bad days. I don't need to be like anyone else. But the words rang hollow when every accomplishment was met with reminders of how Diana had done it better, faster, more impressively. My father Thomas was gentler than my mother. Sometimes he would find me after one of my mother's comparisons and tell me he was proud of me. "You have your own path, Hannah," he would say. But he never confronted my mother about her behavior, and his quiet support wasn't enough to drown out her constant comparisons. By the time I reached high school, I had learned to stop sharing my achievements with my mother. I hid my artwork, kept quiet about positive feedback from teachers, and tried to become invisible at home. It was easier that way. I still painted and drew, but now it was a secret passion, something that belonged only to me. When college acceptance letters started arriving, I held my breath. Diana had gone to Harvard Medical School, fulfilling my mother's dreams. I had applied to several art schools, including the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design. When I got my acceptance letter from RISD, I was ecstatic but terrified to share the news. An art school. My mother's voice was sharp with disappointment when I finally told my parents over dinner. "Hannah, that's not a real career path. Diana is going to be a doctor. She'll be saving lives while you—" "What paint pictures?" "Margaret," my father interjected softly. RISD is a wonderful school. We should be proud. Being proud doesn't pay the bills, my mother replied, cutting her chicken with precise movements that betrayed her irritation. Art is a hobby, not a profession. I went to RISD anyway, using scholarship money and student loans to fund my education. Those 4 years were transformative. For the first time in my life, I was in an environment where my creativity was valued, not dismissed. Professor Sarah Jenkins changed my life during my sophomore year. A renowned sculptor, she took an interest in my work during a foundational painting class. "Hannah, there's something raw and honest in your use of color," she told me after class one day, studying my canvas with intense focus. "You're not just painting what you see, you're painting what you feel." Her words struck me deeply. No one had ever looked at my art with such consideration. No one had ever really seen me. "Thank you," I managed to say, fighting back unexpected tears. "Don't thank me," she replied. "Just keep developing your voice. You have something to say." My roommate Jessica became my closest friend and ally, a photography major from California with bright pink hair and a contagious laugh. She was unapologetically herself. She noticed how I would downplay my talents, how I would flinch when someone complimented my work. "Who made you believe you weren't good enough?" she asked bluntly one night, as we sat on our dorm room floor eating takeout. The question caught me off guard, and suddenly I was telling her everything about growing up in Diana's shadow. Jessica listened without interrupting her expression, growing increasingly outraged. "That's such bullshit," she declared when I finished. "Your mom needs therapy, not you. You're incredibly talented, Hannah. Don't let her make you believe otherwise." Jessica's confidence in me began to seep into my own self-perception. Slowly, I started to believe in myself and my art. But returning home for holidays and breaks was like stepping back in time. My mother's comparisons continued, now focused on our different educational paths. Diana is doing her residency at Massachusetts General. She would tell family friends at holiday gatherings, beaming with pride. Then, almost as an afterthought, "And Hannah is still at that art school." During winter break of my junior year, Diana came home with news she was engaged to Thomas, a fellow doctor she had met during her residency. My mother was ecstatic, planning the wedding before Diana had even finished showing us the ring. Later that evening, my mother cornered me in the kitchen. "You should think about being more practical, Hannah. Look at Diana, she's got her whole life figured out. Don't you want that kind of stability?" "I'm happy with my choices, Mom," I said quietly, loading dishes into the dishwasher. "Are you really? Because from where I stand, you're wasting your potential on a pipe dream. You'll never make a living as an artist." Her words cut deep, and that night I lay awake questioning everything. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being foolish. The next day, I looked into transferring to a business program, researching more practical careers that might finally earn my mother's approval. I was on the verge of giving it all up when I received an email from Professor Jenkins. She had submitted one of my pieces to a student showcase without telling me, and it had been selected. Attached was a photo of my painting hanging in the gallery with people gathered around it. That email was like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. I decided then that I would not abandon my art. I would not try to be Diana. I would be Hannah, for better or worse, and I would follow my passion regardless of my mother's approval. After graduation, I moved to New York City, the epicenter of the art world. It wasn't an easy transition. I found a job as an assistant at a small gallery in Chelsea, making barely enough to share a tiny apartment in Brooklyn with two other aspiring artists. My days were long, often spent doing menial tasks like answering phones and cataloging artwork, with evenings and weekends dedicated to my own art. The first year was brutal. I ate ramen noodles more often than not, worked side jobs bartending to make rent, and struggled to find time and energy for my own creative work. Meanwhile, Diana had completed her residency and was now a full-fledged doctor at one of Boston's top hospitals, making six figures and living in a beautiful brownstone with her husband Thomas. "Diana just bought a new car," my mother informed me during our weekly phone call, which I had begun to dread. "A Tesla. Thomas surprised her for their anniversary. What are you driving these days, Hannah?" "I take the subway, Mom," I replied, staring out my apartment window at the brick wall of the adjacent building. Most people in New York don't own cars. Well, that's practical, I suppose, she said with a sigh that conveyed everything she wasn't saying. When are you going to get a real job, honey? The gallery thing was fine right after college, but you're 26 now. This is a real job, Mom, and I'm making progress with my own work too. I have a piece in a group show next month. That's nice, she said, the dismissal clear in her tone. Oh, did I tell you Diana got a promotion? She's now the youngest attending physician in her department. Every conversation followed this pattern, and each one chipped away at my resolve a little more. Then I met Michael at a gallery opening. Tall, with thoughtful brown eyes and an easy smile, he was a successful tech entrepreneur who collected contemporary art. He noticed me explaining a piece to an elderly couple and later approached me about the artist. You really understand the work, he said, genuine admiration in his voice. Are you an artist yourself? That simple question led to dinner, which led to dating. Michael was the first person outside of art school who took my creative ambitions seriously. He asked to see my portfolio, and unlike my mother's cursory glances, he spent hours looking at each piece, asking questions about my process and inspiration. You have a unique perspective, he told me one evening as we sat in my cramped studio space. Your work has soul. That's rare. His belief in me was intoxicating. For the first time, I felt fully seen and appreciated. Michael encouraged me to apply for residencies and grants, to take my art more seriously as a career, not just a side project. But my weekly calls with my mother continued to be a source of pain. Diana was now pregnant with her first child, and my mother could talk about nothing else. You should see the nursery they're setting up, Hannah. It's absolutely beautiful. Diana has always had such good taste, she gushed one Sunday. When are you going to settle down? You're not getting any younger, you know. Diana was already married at your age. I'm dating someone, Mom. His name is Michael. He's really supportive of my art. That's nice, dear. But is it serious? Does he have a stable career? You need to think about your future. Michael noticed how these conversations affected me. Why do you let her get to you? He asked, after one particularly difficult call left me in tears. You're talented and successful in your own way. Who cares if you're not a doctor like your sister? You don't understand. I tried to explain. It's been this way my whole life. Nothing I do is ever enough. As our relationship progressed, my insecurities began to surface more frequently. When Michael introduced me to his wealthy, accomplished friends, I felt the same inadequacy I experienced with my mother. Was I good enough? Was my art worthy of respect? Would Michael eventually realize I wasn't special, just as my mother had always implied? I began to sabotage our relationship, picking fights and pulling away emotionally. Michael tried to understand, to break through my walls, but I couldn't let him in. After 8 months together, he ended things. I care about you deeply, Hannah, he said, pain evident in his eyes. But I can't be with someone who won't believe in themselves the way I believe in them. You need to figure out who you are outside of your family's expectations. Alone again. I wondered if I would ever escape the shadow of my perfect sister. Diana had given birth to a beautiful baby boy by then, adding amazing mother to her list of accomplishments. My mother sent photos constantly with captions like, Diana makes motherhood look so easy, and baby James has Diana's intelligence, you can already tell. One rare evening, Diana called me directly. We didn't talk often, our lives having diverged so completely. Hey, little sis, she said warmly. How's the big city treating you? It's good. I lied. Busy. Mom says you had a boyfriend, but it didn't work out. I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, well, it happens. I didn't want to get into it, especially not with Diana. Hannah, she hesitated. Is everything okay? You sound, I don't know, sad. For a brief moment, I considered telling her everything. How I'd spent my life feeling inadequate because of Mom's constant comparisons. How I still struggled to believe in myself. How I'd sabotaged the best relationship I'd ever had. Because I couldn't shake the feeling that I was never enough. Instead, I said, I'm fine. Just tired. How's the baby? Diana took the bait, launching into stories about little James, and the moment for honesty passed. I wondered if Diana had any idea what it was like to be the disappointing daughter, or if she was as oblivious to my struggles as she had been when we were kids. After Michael and I broke up, I hit a low point. I was nearly 30, working a job that barely paid the bills with an art career that seemed stalled. I seriously considered giving up moving back to Boston and finding some corporate job that would at least give my mother something other than Diana to compare me to. Instead, I took a risk. I quit my gallery job and rented a tiny storefront in a still ungentrified corner of Bushwick. Half of the space became my studio, and in the other half, I began teaching art classes to make ends meet. The rent was still cheaper than my share of the apartment had been, so I moved into a small room in the back, creating a live workspace that was all mine. It was terrifying. I had limited savings and no safety net. I refused to ask my parents for help. I knew any money would come with my mother's disapproval and disappointment. I took on freelance graphic design work, sold smaller pieces on Etsy, and slowly built up a student base for my classes. 6 months into this new chapter, I was at a friend's opening at a small gallery in the Lower East Side. I had brought along a small canvas, hoping to show it to the gallery owner as a professional courtesy. As I was chatting with the artist, a tall man with salt and pepper hair approached us. "Jamie, this work is compelling," he said to my friend, then turned to me. "And you are Hannah Carroll," I replied, extending my hand. "I'm a friend of Jamie's from art school." "Ethan Blackwood," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I run Blackwood Gallery in Chelsea." My heart skipped a beat. Blackwood Gallery was well respected in the New York art scene, known for launching several important contemporary artists. Ethan Blackwood himself was something of a legend, with an eye for emerging talent that had proven impeccable over the years. Jamie mentioned that I had brought one of my own pieces, and to my surprise, Ethan asked to see it. With trembling hands, I unwrapped the small canvas, a mixed media piece exploring themes of identity and expectation. Ethan studied it silently for what felt like an eternity. "Interesting," he finally said. "There's something here. Do you have more work I could see?" 2 days later, Ethan visited my Bushwick studio space. He moved slowly around the room, examining each piece without comment. I stood nervously in the corner, trying not to fidget or fill the silence with needless chatter. "Your work has matured significantly from that first piece I saw," he said at last. "There's a rawness here, but also technical skill. I sense you're working through something personal in these paintings." "I am," I admitted. "They're about living in someone else's shadow, trying to find your own light." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to see more. Can you produce a cohesive body of work in this vein, say 15 to 20 pieces in the next 6 months?" I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Are you offering me a show?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "A small one, yes, in the project space at the gallery. It would be part of our emerging artist program." That night, still riding the high of Ethan's interest in my work, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Hannah, I have the most wonderful news," she exclaimed without preamble. "Diana has received the Mitchell Award for Excellence in Pediatric Medicine." It's such a prestigious honor, especially for someone her age. There was a whole write-up about it in the Boston Globe. My momentary joy deflated. Even now, even with this potential breakthrough in my career, I still couldn't escape Diana's shadow. "That's great, Mom," I said flatly. "What's wrong with you? You could sound a little more enthusiastic for your sister." I almost told her then about Ethan and the potential show, but something stopped me. I knew exactly how the conversation would go. She would make a dismissive comment, ask if I could actually make money from it, then steer the conversation back to Diana. "I'm just tired, Mom. Long day. Tell Diana congratulations for me." Instead of dwelling on the call, I threw myself into work. For the next 4 months, I painted like I was possessed. Each canvas was an exorcism of sorts, purging years of feeling inadequate, of trying to measure up to an impossible standard. I barely slept, often working through the night, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose. Ethan visited periodically to check on my progress, offering thoughtful critique and encouragement. He never tried to change my vision, only to help me refine it. Under his mentorship, my technique improved and my conceptual framework grew stronger. The day of my first real gallery opening approached. I hadn't told my family about it. Part of me wanted to surprise them, to show them I had succeeded on my own terms. Another part feared their reaction, particularly my mother's inevitable comparison to some accomplishment of Diana's. A week before the opening, Ethan called with unexpected news. "Hannah, Arthur Simmons saw your work when he was visiting the gallery yesterday." I nearly dropped the phone. Arthur Simmons was one of the most important collectors in New York, known for his unerring taste and generous support of emerging artists. He's interested in the large triptych, Ethan continued. Wanted me to put a hold on it. The triptych was the centerpiece of my show, three large canvases that together told the story of emergence from another's shadow into self-acceptance. It was the most personal piece I had ever created, and the thought of selling it filled me with both pride and loss. How much? I asked, hardly daring to breathe. Ethan named a figure that was more money than I had ever seen at once in my life, enough to give me financial security for at least a year, maybe two, if I was careful, enough to legitimize my choice to pursue art in the eyes of anyone, except perhaps my mother. The sale went through. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. I could afford to focus exclusively on my art without teaching classes or taking on graphic design work. It felt like vindication proof that I had been right to follow my own path, despite my mother's constant doubts. As the opening approached, reviews of my show began appearing in art blogs and smaller publications. They were largely positive, with several critics noting the emotional depth and technical skill evident in the work. One even used the word promising, high praise in the notoriously critical New York art scene. I sent invitations to the opening to my parents, and Diana, not really expecting them to make the trip from Boston for something they had never shown interest in before. Part of me hoped they would surprise me, that they would finally see that I had found success on my own terms. The night of the opening arrived, and the gallery was packed with New York art world figures, friends, former professors, and curious onlookers. Ethan introduced me to important critics and collectors. People I had admired from afar now stood in front of my paintings, discussing them seriously. My family did not come. 3 months after my successful opening at Blackwood Gallery, I received a panicked call from Diana. Our father had suffered a heart attack and was in the hospital. I packed a bag and caught the first train to Boston, my mind racing with worry. When I arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital, Diana was there in her white coat, looking exhausted but professional. She hugged me tightly, something we rarely did as adults. "He's stable," she assured me, "but it was a close call. They're keeping him for observation and running more tests." "Does Mom know? Is she here?" "She's in the cafeteria getting coffee. She's been here all night." I found my mother sitting alone at a small table, staring into a cup of coffee. She looked older than I remembered, more vulnerable. When she saw me, she stood and embraced me briefly. "You came," she said, as if surprised. "Of course I came. He's my father." We sat in awkward silence for a moment. It had been almost a year since I'd been home, our communication limited to tense phone calls. "Your show went well?" she asked, finally surprising me with the acknowledgement. "Yes," I said cautiously. "It did. I sold several pieces." "That's good," she said with a nod. Then, predictably, Diana was just named head of pediatric cardiology, the youngest in the hospital's history. And there it was. Even with my father lying in a hospital bed, even with me flying in from New York at a moment's notice, she couldn't help herself. I bit back a retort. This wasn't the time or place. For the next week, I stayed at my parents' house, helping my mother manage the household and visiting my father daily. Diana was often at the hospital professionally, able to check in on him between her regular duties. Our father was recovering well, but would need significant lifestyle changes and careful monitoring going forward. One afternoon, alone in the house while my mother was at the hospital, I found myself wandering into the attic. It was dusty and cramped, filled with boxes of family memorabilia. I opened one labeled Family Photos and began looking through the albums inside. There were the expected photos of Diana's achievements, her graduation's awards, sports trophies. But I also found something unexpected: a small album filled with photos of my mother as a young woman. In several, she stood beside paintings looking proud but uncomfortable. "What are you doing up here?" I jumped at my mother's voice. She stood in the attic doorway looking at the album in my hands. "Just looking through old photos," I said. "Mom, I didn't know you painted." She came and sat beside me, taking the album. "I did once, before I met your father." "What happened? Why did you stop?" She sighed, running her finger over a photo of herself standing next to an easel. "My parents didn't approve. They thought art was a waste of time, that I should focus on finding a husband and starting a family." She paused. They were a lot like me, I suppose. This revelation stunned me. My mother, the pragmatist who had dismissed my artistic pursuits my entire life, had once been an artist herself. Is that why? I began, not knowing how to finish the question. Why I was so hard on you about your art, she finished for me. Maybe, I don't know, I just wanted you to have security to not struggle the way I might have if I'd pursued painting. It wasn't an apology, but it was more insight into her thinking than she had ever offered before. Later that week, I had a long talk with my father in his hospital room. Diana was in surgery and my mother had gone home to rest. You know, he said, his voice weak but warm. Your mother had a hard time with her own parents. They were very critical, especially her father. Nothing was ever good enough for him. That doesn't excuse how she treated me, Dad. He nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. I should have said something years ago. I thought if I balanced it out by supporting you, it would be enough. I was wrong, and I'm sorry for that. His apology brought tears to my eyes. All those years he had seen what was happening, but had chosen the path of least resistance. Diana knows too, he continued. She feels terrible about it now that she understands. She didn't see it when you were younger, but she sees it now. The next day, Diana pulled me aside after visiting hours. Hannah, can we talk? There's something I need to say. We walked to the hospital cafeteria, getting tea and finding a quiet corner. I know Mom has always compared us, she said directly. I didn't really notice when we were kids, but I see it now. And I want you to know how sorry I am that I never stood up for you. I hadn't expected this conversation, hadn't prepared for Diana's acknowledgement. It's not your fault, I said automatically. No, but I benefited from it. And I never considered how it might feel to be constantly measured against someone else. She hesitated. The truth is, being the perfect daughter comes with its own kind of pressure. Mom's expectations for me are impossible sometimes. For the first time, I saw Diana not as the golden child who had made my childhood miserable, but as another woman navigating our mother's complicated expectations. I've seen your work online, she continued, surprising me again. It's amazing, Hannah. I could never create something like that. You have a gift. Her sincere admiration meant more than I could express. Back at my parents' house, I decided to look through my old bedroom. It was largely unchanged from my high school days, preserved like a museum, to a version of myself I had long outgrown. In the back of my closet, I found a portfolio of drawings and paintings from my teenage years that I had hidden from my mother's critical eye. As I was looking through them, my mother appeared in the doorway. What are those? She asked, coming into the room. Just some old art projects, I said instinctively, moving to put them away. May I see? Reluctantly, I handed her the portfolio. She sat on my bed and began looking through the pieces one by one, her expression unreadable. These are quite good, she said finally, especially for someone so young. You never wanted to see them before, I couldn't help pointing out. No, I suppose I didn't. She continued looking through the portfolio. You have real talent, Hannah. You always did. I didn't know what to say. After 32 years of criticism and comparison, this small acknowledgement felt both monumental and insufficient. Your gallery show, she said suddenly. Do you have pictures? I pulled out my phone and showed her the professional photos of the installation. She looked at each one carefully. The reviews mentioned your exploration of identity in the shadow of expectation, she said, revealing that she had read about my show despite never mentioning it. That was about me, wasn't it? About how I made you feel. Yes, I admitted. It was. She handed me back my phone, her face tight with emotion I couldn't quite identify. I suppose I've been unfair to you. It wasn't the apology I had longed for, the recognition of years of damage done. Something in me snapped. Unfair? Is that what you call constantly comparing me to Diana, making me feel like nothing I ever did was good enough? The words poured out, years of hurt finally finding voice. Do you have any idea what that did to me growing up, always feeling second best in my own home? My mother's expression hardened. I wanted what was best for you. Diana chose a sensible path, a respectable career. You chose to pursue a hobby. It's not a hobby, Mom. It's my profession, my passion, my gift, and I'm good at it. Really good, but you've never been able to see that because you're too busy looking at Diana. You're being dramatic, Hannah, she said dismissively. This is exactly why I worried about you. You're too emotional, too impractical. You'll never match your sister's level-headed approach to life. There it was again. You'll never match your sister. The familiar words that had cut me down my entire life. But this time, instead of shrinking away, I stood taller. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I won't ever match Diana because I'm not Diana. I'm Hannah. And I'm done trying to meet your impossible standards. My mother stared at me, clearly unprepared for this response. What are you talking about? All my life you've compared me to Diana. Every achievement, every milestone, every choice was measured against her. Do you have any idea what that's like? To never be good enough simply because you're not someone else? I wanted you to have a stable future, my mother said defensively. Diana chose a sensible path. And I chose my own path, I countered. A path that makes me happy, that fulfills me creatively and spiritually. Why couldn't that be enough for you? Because art doesn't pay the bills, Hannah. I was trying to protect you from struggle and disappointment. I laughed without humor. Protect me by making me feel worthless, by dismissing everything I cared about. That's not protection, Mom. That's control. My mother's face flushed. You have no idea what the real world is like. Your sister works saving children's lives while you paint pretty pictures in New York. I know exactly what the real world is like, I said, refusing to back down. I've been living in it on my own, making my own way without your support or approval for years now. And you know what? I'm succeeding. On my terms. If you call scraping by in some studio apartment succeeding, she scoffed, I don't scrape by. I had a successful show at one of the most respected galleries in New York. I sold work to major collectors. Critics praised my art. But you wouldn't know any of that because you've never once asked about my career with any real interest. My mother fell silent, her expression a mixture of surprise and disbelief. I'm not asking you to understand my choices. I continued, my confidence growing with each word. I'm asking you to respect them, to respect me as an individual with my own talents and dreams, not as a failed copy of Diana. I never said you were a failed copy, my mother protested weakly. You didn't have to say it. You showed it in 1,000 small ways every day of my childhood. The comparisons, the dismissals, the disappointment in your eyes whenever I didn't measure up to Diana's standard. My mother looked down at her hands, something like shame crossing her features briefly. But old habits die hard. Well, Diana has always been exceptional, she said, falling back on familiar territory. Her work saves lives. And my work speaks to souls, I replied. Art has the power to heal too, just in a different way. But you've never valued that, have you? I reached into my bag and pulled out the art magazine that had featured my show, opening it to the 2-page spread about my work. I handed it to my mother without comment. She took it reluctantly, skimming the article at first, then going back to read it more carefully. Her expression shifted as she absorbed the praise from respected critics, the detailed analysis of my technique and vision, the comparison to established artists. I didn't know, she began. No, you didn't, because you never asked. You were too busy telling me about Diana's latest accomplishment to ever really see what I was doing. My mother closed the magazine, looking suddenly tired. What do you want from me, Hannah? I want you to stop comparing us. I want you to see me for who I am, not for who I'm not. And if you can't do that, then I need to set boundaries that protect me from your criticism. Boundaries, she repeated, as if the word were foreign. Yes, I won't engage in conversations where you compare me to Diana. I won't listen to dismissive comments about my career. And I won't tolerate being made to feel less than because my path is different from what you wanted. My mother seemed genuinely taken aback. You're really serious about this? I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I love you, Mom. You're my mother. But I can't keep allowing you to make me feel worthless. The door opened and Diana walked in, still in her doctor's coat. She must have come straight from the hospital. Everything okay in here? I could hear you two from downstairs. Your sister is setting boundaries, my mother said with a slight edge in her voice. Diana looked at me with understanding. Good for you, Hannah. It's about time. Our mother turned to Diana, shocked. What? Mom, I love you, but Hannah's right. You've always compared us, and it's not fair to either of us. You put me on a pedestal that's impossible to stay on, and you never gave Hannah credit for her own gifts. Our mother looked from Diana to me and back again, seeming truly startled by this united front. I only wanted what was best for both of you. We know, Diana said gently, but we get to decide what's best for ourselves. And Hannah has found her path just like I found mine. They're different paths, but they're both valid. The art magazine, my mother said slowly, looking down at it again. This is a big deal, isn't it? Yes, Mom, Diana answered before I could. It's a very big deal. In Hannah's world, this is like me being chief of medicine. You should be proud. For perhaps the first time in my life, I saw my mother really look at me, not as Diana's less successful sister, but as Hannah, an artist, a woman who had forged her own path against significant odds. I may have been wrong, she said quietly, the closest thing to an apology I had ever heard from her. About your art, at least. It wasn't everything, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of criticism that had surrounded me since childhood. A small acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, my choices had merit too. Diana crossed the room and put her arm around my shoulders. Hannah has always been the brave one, she said to our mother. I did what was expected. She had the courage to follow her heart despite the pressure. In that moment, standing beside my sister, not as a competitor, but as an ally, I felt a shift in our family dynamic, subtle but significant. The ground beneath us had changed, and with it the possibility of a new kind of relationship. 6 months later, I stood in the center of Blackwood Gallery's main space, surrounded by my newest body of work. After the success of my smaller show, Ethan had offered me a full exhibition, a rare opportunity for an artist at my stage. The paintings that filled the walls represented a departure from my earlier work. While still personal, they explored themes of reconciliation, understanding, and the complex bonds of family. They were more hopeful, less angry, a reflection of my own evolving relationship with my past. My father, fully recovered from his heart attack, stood nearby, pride evident in his eyes as he studied each piece carefully. Diana had flown in from Boston with her husband and son, now a toddler, who delighted in the colorful canvases surrounding him. And remarkably, my mother was there too. In the months since our confrontation, we had begun the slow, sometimes painful process of rebuilding our relationship on more equal footing. It hadn't been easy. Decades of patterns don't change overnight. There were still moments when she slipped into old habits, when I had to gently but firmly remind her of our boundaries. But she was trying, and that meant everything. She approached me now elegant in a blue dress she had bought specially for the occasion. The turnout is impressive, she said, gesturing to the crowded gallery. Your father and I saw your name in the New York Times art section this morning. Thank you for coming, I said sincerely. It means a lot to have you all here. She nodded, studying the large canvas in front of us. This one, she said hesitantly, it reminds me of that album we found in the attic. My old paintings. I smiled. She was right. The piece incorporated elements inspired by her youthful artwork, a visual acknowledgement of our shared creative DNA. You noticed, I said, touched by her observation. I do pay attention, Hannah. I'm learning to, at least. She paused. I'm proud of you. Not because you're successful by conventional standards now, but because you stayed true to yourself when I made that very difficult. It was the validation I had craved my entire life coming when I no longer needed it to define my worth. Still, it washed over me like a healing balm. Across the room, I caught Ethan's eye. He nodded toward a small group of people he was speaking with, indicating I should join them. I had been surprised when our professional relationship had gradually evolved into something more personal in recent months. Ethan's respect for my work had extended to respect for me as a person, and we had begun dating cautiously, both of us wary of complicating our professional connection. I should go talk to those collectors, I told my mother. Ethan's waving me over. He seems nice, she said with a knowing look. Different from Michael. I laughed. Yes, very different. And that's a good thing. As I made my way across the gallery, I reflected on how much had changed in the past year. the most profound change wasn't in my career, though, that had certainly flourished. It was in me, in how I saw myself, in how I moved through the world. For so long, I had defined myself in opposition to Diana, or in relation to my mother's disappointment. I had carried the weight of never matching my sister like a stone around my neck, dragging me down even as I tried to swim toward my own shore. The healing began when I finally stood my ground, when I refused to accept the narrative that had been written for me. It continued as I learned to see my sister, not as competition, but as an ally facing her own set of pressures. And it deepened as I came to understand my mother's criticism as a reflection of her own unrealized dreams and fears, not an accurate assessment of my worth. I started teaching art classes again, not because I needed the money anymore, but because I wanted to help others find their creative voice. Many of my students were adults who had been told, like me, that art wasn't a real career, that their creative pursuits were just hobbies. Watching them reclaim that part of themselves was profoundly rewarding. Diana and I spoke more often now, our conversations no longer shadowed by unspoken resentment. She confessed that she sometimes envied my freedom, the creative life I had built for myself, just as I had once envied her success and our mother's approval. We each have our own path, she told me during one of our calls, and they're both valuable. My father, too, had changed after his health scare. He was more vocal in his support, more willing to stand up to my mother when old patterns emerged. He had framed one of my smaller pieces and hung it in his office, telling everyone who asked about his famous artist's daughter. And my mother, well, change came harder for her. But she was making an effort. She had started painting again tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. We weren't best friends, probably never would be. But there was a new respect between us, an acknowledgement that different didn't mean less than. As for me, I had finally learned that I didn't need to match anyone else to be worthy of love and respect. My value wasn't comparative, it was inherent. I had found my voice both artistically and personally. I had learned to stand my ground. The success that followed, the sales, the reviews, the recognition, was gratifying, of course. But it wasn't what healed me. What healed me was the knowledge that even without those external validations, I was enough, had always been enough. I approached the group Ethan was speaking with professionals whose opinion could further my career, but I no longer felt desperate for their approval. I knew who I was now, Hannah Carroll artist, not Diana's sister, not Margaret's disappointing daughter, just Hannah following her own path, shining with her own light. Have you ever felt compared to someone else in your family? How did you deal with those comparisons and find your own identity? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Remember, you are enough exactly as you are, and your unique path is valid. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you stand your ground in your own life situations. Until next time.